Please introduce yourself to the court.
I'm Frances Kimball.
What is your profession, Ms. Kimball?
I am a detective with the Breckenridge County Police Department.
Do you have a specialty?
I do. I specifically work as a detective in the Financial Crimes Unit, or as those of us in the unit refer to it, the FCU.
What does a detective in a financial crimes unit do?
I primarily handle cases involving embezzlements, forgeries, frauds, and thefts.
How much experience do you have in the financial crimes unit at Breckenridge County Police Department?
I've been working as a detective for the past 10 years. The majority of it has been with the Financial Crimes Unit, although at the beginning I did a little bit of work in the Robbery Unit as well.
What kind of education do you hold?
I graduated the top of my class at the academy that I attended.
How are you familiar with Rock-to-World?
The department's been called down to Rock-to-World a couple of times to handle issues involving inebriated college students or problems of that sort. But I do have to say I was surprised when I received a phone call from the park's owner, Mr. Longstreet, on August 1st of 2012.
What did this phone call contain?
He had asked me if I could look over the financials of the park. He wasn't exactly sure what was going on, but something seemed a little off, and he wanted to see if I could run a sort of audit for him.
How did you respond to the CEO's request for an audit?
I complied with his requests, and shortly after, their park accountant supplied me with all of the financial documents I needed to proceed with my investigation.
What kind of information do you rely upon to arrive at financial conclusions?
The documents that I was given and our standard practice for us to rely upon were the profit and loss sheets of the park, the click count sheets, as well as the 3-year summary of the World Tour ticket sales.
Is this the kind of information that's normally relied upon in your field?
Yes, it is.
What kind of principles and methods did you use?
The same ones that I was taught at the academy.
Did you have sufficient facts and data to arrive at a conclusion?
Yes, I did.
Did you apply the reliable principles and methods that you testified to reliably to the facts that you were given?
I did, yes.
Were you able to arrive to a conclusion for this case based on your education, training, and experience?
I was.
Please share that conclusion with the court.
Well, after reviewing the financial documents I was given and comparing the different monetary values and numbers on these documents, I was able to conclude that there was money being taken from the park.
Objection, Your Honor. In the proper opinion. Yes, Your Honor.
Could you please explain?
Yes, Your Honor. At this point in time, this witness has testified to her experience, her education, her qualifications, the documents she has used, but she hasn't testified as to what those principles and methods were, what she actually did to come to that conclusion. All she's testified to at this point in time is the documents she used. She didn't testify as to how she used those documents, how she used those documents to come to her conclusions. And it's very relevant for the members of the jury to hear that kind of information for the witness's testimony.
May I respond, Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Pursuant to the Midlands Rules of Evidence, Rule 702, before an expert is allowed to give their opinion onto the record, 3 prongs must be met: that they had sufficient facts and data, reliable principles and methods, and they applied those reliable principles and methods reliably to the facts that they were given. This goes more towards weight, not admissibility, for those 3 prongs have been met for the admissibility of this opinion.
I'm going to sustain the objection in that I believe you have had the witness identify the 2 prongs for us, but you haven't had the witness identify what the facts and data were, what the principles and methods were. So if you want to lay that additional foundation.
Sure, Your Honor.
Move to strike the conclusion from the record at this point in time, Your Honor.
Motion to strike, guys.
Detective, what information were you saying you relied upon to arrive at your conclusions?
I had used the financial documents of the park, or that the park had given me. Specifically, the profit and loss sheet seemed to be the most relevant of the ones that I reviewed. I reviewed the monetary values of the sales of the park for each month of the past 3 years that they had documented.
Would you recognize a copy of that profit and loss sheet if I had it with me in court?
I would, yes.
May the record reflect that I'm approaching the closing counsel what has been previously marked as States 2 for identification purposes. Permission to approach the witness.
Granted.
I'm in turn approaching the witness with the same document. Detective Kimball, what have I handed you?
This is the park's profit and loss sheet for the years 2010 through 2012.
Is this the same document that you relied on to arrive at your conclusions?
It is.
Has it been changed or altered in any way since you've last seen it?
No, it is not.
How did you obtain this document?
This was given to me by the park's accountant, Miss Floyd, excuse me.
State moves Exhibit 2 into evidence.
I would object, Your Honor, to hearsay.
May I hear it?
You may.
Pursuant to Rule 703, experts may rely on underlying facts and data that would otherwise be inadmissible in order to form their conclusion. This is laying foundation for that opinion that's given.
May I respond on those grounds, Your Honor?
You may.
However, they may rely on that inadmissible evidence to come to their conclusions. That evidence isn't allowed to be entered into evidence. This is testimony of hearsay information, numbers she relied on to come to her conclusions. She can't testify to those numbers. However, they can't just admit a document because she relied on it.
Maybe here. Just moments earlier, our opposing counsel wanted to hear the foundation, the facts underlying this opinion. This is what we're attempting to do now.
Objection to overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Your Honor, is the exhibit admitted?
Yes, the exhibit will be admitted.
Permission to approach the bench intended?
Granted.
Detective Kimball, based on your education, training, and experience, what is your conclusion as far as the financials go at Rock the World Amusement Park?
The park was experiencing a loss of revenue, and I was able to conclude that problem to be coming from a ticket scheme that was going on throughout the park.
How much revenue is being lost secondary to this scheme?
It was in the thousands.
Now, what does this tell us?
This tells us that there was an inconsistency with the number, or based off the information I gathered, there was an inconsistency with the number of World Tour ticket sales documented compared to the number of patrons that were in the park.
What kind of inconsistency are we talking about here?
There was a steep and steady decline in the number of World Tour ticket sales, even though the number of customers in the park was increasing, and this wasn't matching up with previous years.
So the fact that ticket sales are going down while population's going up, what does that tell us?
It tells us the way that money was being lost through the ticket booth, and it had to do with the ticket scheme that was taking place.
How are you able to isolate this to the ticket booth?
After reviewing all of the facts, I realized that the only place that tickets were sold in the park were at the ticket booth, which means the problem would have had to be coming from within.
Who was working the ticket booth during the summer of 2012 at Rock the World?
Cameron Poole.
Through your investigation, was anybody else identified as working the ticket booth besides Cameron Poole?
No, no one else was.
Detective Kimball, were you able to make an arrest based on your findings?
I was. I ended up arresting Whit Bowman.
Detective, we just spent a lot of time talking about how Cameron Poole was working the ticket booth, the source of the money being stolen. Why did you arrest Whit Bowman?
I arrested Ms. Bowman for her involvement in the crimes on August 30th and the months leading up to that day.
Do you see Whit Bowman today in court?
I do, yes.
Could you please identify her using an article of clothing?
She's in the blue dress at the end of the council table.
Let the record reflect that Detective Kimball accurately identified the defendant.
The record shall so reflect.
You just mentioned that the defendant was involved in a crime occurring on August 30th. How do you know this?
It had to do with me being there at the park on that day and interviewing witnesses.
What were you doing at the park that day?
I was in Mr. Longstreet's office going over my financial findings with him when we heard these screams coming from the front of the park.
What happened next?
We both ran over there to see what had happened, and upon my arrival, I found Miss Floyd collapsing to the ground, very shaken up.
Who's Miss Floyd?
Miss Floyd is the park's accountant.
And were you able to later learn what had happened in this ticket booth?
I was. Shortly after the incident had occurred, I was able to interview Miss Floyd. It was difficult at first for her to explain what had happened, but I found out everything that had gone on inside the ticket booth.
What did Miss Floyd tell you happened in that ticket booth?
She had informed me that a knife had been held to her face, and she was forced to put all this money into a bag. The knife, she kept saying it was blue, it must have been Whit's.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
This falls under a hearsay exception 8032 and excited utterance. We heard that Haley Floyd was the victim of a robbery and that these statements were being made in an interview to Detective Kimball immediately thereafter. Certainly she was still under the stress caused by that stressful condition or event.
In order for this exception to fall under excited utterance, it has to be at or near the time of the incident. Detective Kimball, she said it happened around the time of the incident. There isn't any clear foundation as to when it was that she interviewed her. How far after did she interview Miss Floyd and get this information?
May I respond to those, sir? Detective Kimball testified that she interviewed the victim right after this occurred.
Can we get a clarification on what right after means?
Sure.
Objection sustained.
Move to strike the testimony, Your Honor.
Shall be stricken.
Detective, when exactly did you perform this interview with the victim?
I started it when I first approached her, when I found her on the ground, and then I finished it after the chase that ensued at the park.
When you were interviewing Haley Floyd, did she appear still to be shaken up?
She was very shaken up. She was huddled into herself. She was shaking a lot. At first, when I tried to interview her, her words weren't very clear, and then as the interview continued, she started shouting out what had taken place.
Detective Kimball, are you familiar with robberies?
Yes, I am. I used to work in the robbery unit.
Have you seen robberies taking place before?
I have, yes.
Have you interacted with robbery victims before?
I have, yes. And Miss Floyd was the epitome of what a robbery victim would look like.
What was Miss Floyd telling you about what had happened immediately before that?
She had told me that Cameron Poole had come into the booth, held a knife to her, said it was a blue-handled knife, and it must have been Wynn's.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Your Honor, I believe that sufficient foundation has been laid to establish that this was an excited utterance made by the victim immediately after the crime was committed.
May I respond, Your Honor? This witness has the exact time of the interview that she had actually taken for Miss Floyd. And that timing was, if I may proffer, in cross-examination, her timing was an hour after the incident, an hour after the fact. She interviewed Miss Floyd.
Your Honor, may I respond? Your Honor, that timing, Detective Kimball said that she initiated her interview immediately after, and I'm actually not sure what time opposing counsel is referring to.
Based on all of the testimony regarding the condition of the witness, I'm going to go ahead and overrule the objection, permit the testimony under that exception.
Detective Kimball, what did you do after the ticket?
Miss Floyd was pointing in the opposite direction of the park, shouting, "Stop him, stop him." So I began chasing after the suspect that she was pointing at.
Who was she pointing at?
She was pointing at Cameron Poole.
Where were they going?
Cameron Poole was headed towards the opposite side of the park.
What happened during the chase?
I found out that I was not the only person chasing after Cameron Poole. The security guard, Officer Winston Thomas, was also running after Cameron.
Did they ever reach the Tunnel of Terror?
They did eventually reach the Tunnel of Terror, yes.
What happened there?
They ran into the ride. Once they ran in, all of the lights in the ride went out.
What happened next?
I then entered the ride, and there was a lot of screaming going on, and eventually I heard this thud.
What next?
The lights came back on, and that's when I found Winston Thomas on the ground in front of the ride.
What did you do after that?
I checked to see if he was all right. I checked his vitals. He was alive, but completely unresponsive.
Detective Kimball, where was Cameron Poole?
He had escaped.
What was Winston Thomas' state at this point?
Completely unresponsive. He seemed to be unconscious.
What happened next?
I turned to the control panel to see how the lights had been shut off, and that's where I found Whit Bowman.
Where was Whit Bowman?
She was standing behind the controls of the Tunnel of Terror.
What did you do with the defendant?
I then interviewed her.
How did she respond to your questioning?
She gave me everything I needed to know, including lying to me twice, so I arrested her for those.
Said she lied to you twice. What was the first lie?
The first lie involved the ownership of a phone that was sitting on the control panel.
How did she lie with respect to that?
She had told, when I first noticed the phone, I had asked her if it was hers, and I asked if she could show me the contents of the phone. She informed me that it was not hers. I then looked at the phone anyways, and after reading the contents of it, I threatened to arrest her, and at that point she retracted her original statement and told me the phone was indeed hers.
What was the second lie?
The second lie involved her relationship with Cameron Poole.
How did she lie about that?
She had told me that Cameron Poole and her were simply acquaintances that had met that summer. Later investigation came to find that they had actually known each other for years.
Objection, Your Honor. Testimony based on hearsay. May I?
Yes.
So far at this point in time, we've heard what she learned during Ms. Bowman's interview. That evidence may be when she's saying Ms. Bowman lied, meaning that she had other information, other corroborating information that suggested otherwise. She hasn't testified to that information, but is using that information as a testimony, as evidence based on hearsay.
May I respond? Your Honor, this is exactly what expert testimony is allowed to do. Pursuant to case law, Richards v. Mississippi Barbecue, an expert opinion may be given based on hearsay as long as they're not acting as a mere conduit to those hearsay statements and they're applying it to some form of specialized knowledge that they have to form a conclusion.
And in this instance, is the expert opinion that the witness is offering that person she's referring to lied?
The lie is a result of the information that she gathered secondary to her interviews, the information she elected. Yes.
But that lie was told as the opinion.
Yes.
Your Honor, they have to connect that lie, that evidence, that hearsay information to the conclusion, and if they don't, I will re-object.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor. Move to strike.
Shall be stricken.
Detective, why'd you arrest the defendant?
I arrested the defendant because of the crimes that she committed on August 30th and leading up to that day.
Thank you. I have no further questions.